Welcome to Cell Culture Community, where we explore how bioengineering can transform human and planetary health. This is the last episode in our mini-series on neonatal health technologies designed for use in low-resource settings. This series was inspired by the shocking vulnerability of a child to health inequities in their first month of life. In 2022 alone, we saw 2.3 million neonatal deaths. It's both concerning and hopeful that outcomes vary a lot based on the access to care that a child has. Among premature babies, for instance, we see over 90% survive in high-income countries, while half of them are lost in comparable low-income settings due to basic issues such as infections or a lack of warmth. Earlier in this series, we talked about the design principles for a neonatal CPAP with Tanner and market adoption strategies for a phototherapy device with KK. If you're interested in hearing more, give our other episodes a listen. Our guest for today takes us back into the design journey, but from a clinical perspective. As we chat about the temperature monitor she's worked on, we frequently get off the highway to explore curious side roads about education, faith, and cultural differences in how we interpret color. She takes us to a wonderfully personal place. So let's jump in. I'm here with Sonia. She's currently a clinical research engineer at the Rice360 Institute for Global Health Technologies. Rice360, associated with Rice University, runs educational programs, conducts research, and designs solutions around global health challenges. She's been there for a while. Prior to this, she was a fellow there, leading the development of a low-cost warming crib and continuous temperature monitor. Sonia, welcome to the show.
Thanks, very happy to be here.
Before we dive deep into one of the devices you worked on, tell us a little about what you do. What does it mean to be a clinical research engineer?
Yes, I kind of grew into this role, kind of like overseeing my fellowship. So I was really blessed to arrive at a time at Rice360 where we were expanding into like a bigger initiative that allowed for me to stay. During my global health fellowship, like some of the devices that I had worked on were already at the like initial prototype state. So early in my fellowship, I got to join a clinical study for one of those technologies that the previous fellow was doing. I got to just travel with her to help her finish, and then just got to do that several times during my fellowship. So I kind of had that experience. I was open to staying and seeing what role was available for me at Rice360. They proposed if I can design and conduct clinical studies for the technologies as they were in a later stage. So clinical research engineer blends my experience with the medical device technologies and the clinical studies aspect to test in the clinical setting, and then just go through all of those steps of eventually publication and dissemination.
It sounds really interesting, and sounds like you get to interface with a lot of different kinds of projects, different kinds of people. For the last couple of episodes, we've kind of been assuming we have a common understanding of buzzwords like global health and low-resource setting. I have my own understanding based on readings and travels around India, but Sonia is from Mexico, and Rice University is in the US. So I wanted to dig deeper into what this meant to her. But sometimes these buzzwords can be very abstract, and there's really a variety of settings that could come under this umbrella, from American to international, urban to rural. So how would you define the kinds of problems and places that Rice360 works in?
Yes, thank you. That's a really great question. I think that kind of has been in my mind for a really long time. So from my background, I grew up in Mexico. So born and raised in Mexico, just grew up in like a maybe middle high income family. I guess I never experienced in my own life like health problems, but with my family, we volunteered doing medical mission trips in Mexico to indigenous communities So we had to travel, I don't know, like 24 hours by car. And like some of those were like really rough terrain, like up in the mountains, and just encounter communities that really they didn't have a hospital or even a clinic, like hours and hours away. So just getting to see the real need for technology. To me, what really speaks to me is I think there are some gaps that easy, like just very easy, simple technology that's always there could really make a difference.
Yeah, totally. And it's amazing you got that experience as a child, because I think even for me, so many of my values and priorities come from growing up in Delhi, which is a city where you kind of see it all. It's a very unequal city, similar to a lot of major cities around the world.
Yeah, a lot of inequalities. Yeah, so going back to your question of global health, to me is just having like like minimum access to like in everyone, right? So I know part of what we're doing at Rice360 within like our bigger ecosystem is also for deployment in like underinsured or uninsured people in the United States, or just more rural places in the US where you wouldn't think that these things are needed, but they are. And then we can go all the way into lower levels of care clinics that, for example, are delivering babies. So they do need continuous temperature monitoring, or they do need access to these like initial diagnostic tools. And like maybe even some of these clinics or birthing centers, they do have like a referral chain. But if they lack those equipment that will really shed light on how the baby's doing, then they're not able to kick on those that referral chain, right? So it's really broad, and then we can go all into like refugee camps or like nomad areas where people choose to live that way, but for them to do have access to care, you know.
There's so many dimensions to access, from insurance status and the quality of the roads and clinics around you, to the relationship that the ethnic and community groups you belong to, such as tribal groups, have with the institutions that provide healthcare in your country.
We do think about power outage. We're just not having power availability. And like you want to design enough, but you don't want to over design and just make your device too expensive just because you're running it out of a car battery, right? So that's really tricky to do, but trying to really entertain the question and be like, what can we provide that could help? Maybe it's not going to help 100% of the cases if the battery is depleted, but it will help the majority of the cases.
It's really interesting to hear about the broad set of environments that Sonia and her team are designing for at the same time. Next, we discuss how they build up their understanding of healthcare experiences and challenges from these diverse settings. Let's dive into the process that a single project goes, and we'll focus on the Celsi continuous temperature monitor, which you worked on, from need identification through prototyping, clinical studies, and eventually reaching patients. Your team refers to this as the journey of an innovation. What is that journey and how does it begin?
Yeah, so as you previously mentioned, the Rice360 Institute is an institute inside Rice University. So these all started as trying to provide real problems to bioengineers so they can have real hands experience during their studies.
In the beginning, they sourced a lot of problems through partnerships, especially with doctors at the Texas Medical Center.
Doctors that had experience in low resource settings.
There are actually a lot of doctors that travel just once or twice a year
to either teach or to do research. So I think that's where it started, like that first interaction of knowing real problems. And then some of them can be like, oh, maybe there's like this niche where it's something that's smaller that could be affordable that we can entertain, right? So a project goes into the students, and then they do like needs assessment. just try to see it from different angles too, because sometimes it's like, well, what does the doctor thinks he wants? And what does the nurse actually needs? Who is going to be using it? Is it the doctor? Is it the nurse? Is it family?
She says after that, the most promising ideas are taken up and developed by their postbac fellows. We'll talk a lot more about how Rice360 structures its courses to support the development of complex devices alongside educational goals. For now, we dive deeper into the story of the Celsi continuous temperature monitor. Most need areas at Rice360 come from doctors' travel diaries, but Celsi was different. It was born out of the development of another technology.
So the first device that we were able to create, kind of like all the step, is a low-cost CPAP, which helps small babies get treated for when they just can't breathe on their own. So it creates positive pressure.
This is the same concept Tanner worked on at Equalize Health.
That device, I think it took about like 7 or 8 years to go and maybe about 10 years to deploy. And after that, they were doing studies on how is the implementation. They were tracking the baby's mortality or the baby's expectancy with CPAP. And they found that even if the baby had CPAP, the baby still had poor outcomes if other vitals weren't monitored, and temperature was one of them. So basically, you can have CPAP, but if the baby's so cold, he might not survive. So that was just a thing that was like, wait, we made this device, we're so proud of it, but it's not working how it needs to if the babies don't have this holistic support. So I think the next big thing was temperature. And I think I grew a keen to the project because going through literature, I really found like how unnoticed hypothermia can go, because it doesn't, well, first, it's not like a real diagnosis, like, oh, it's a disease, you have hypothermia. It's just kind of like a thing that happens. So I think it's hard to entertain the level of like how bad it is, but I think it is really bad. So babies that have hypothermia just overall have poor outcomes, because if their system is trying to keep them warm, then they're not, like, that's kind of like what they're focusing on instead of trying to recuperate in like these other conditions that they have.
According to one study, for every degree Celsius drop in neonatal body temperature, the risk of mortality increases by 80%.
The current standard of care, or the current thing that happens in low risk settings, is that like a nurse goes and does spot check axillary temperature. And sometimes there can be one nurse available per several babies. So that's just a burden that needs to be repeated every so often. And it's almost like by the time you finish doing the last one, you have to already start on the first one. And of course, you have to document it. By the time you're already back on the first one, like another baby's crying, like it's time to feed, it's time to do medication. So it can be a really taxing task that I think just kind of gets deprioritized until the baby is really showing other symptoms, right? Like the baby is lethargic, the baby has developed sepsis, and also like hyperthermia. So fever is also important to detect, right?
There's a lot Sonia and her team learned from talking to nurses in the field.
One of the things that we noticed is elderly nurses working on the ward. We wanted to have good visualization of the temperature of the digits. That was taken into account in the design to just have something that displayed the temperature kind of big. We also wanted, just thinking about how the flow of the word will go, we wanted to add a visual alarm so people can know when a baby needs more attention. And through that, just kind of like a interesting story, our first prototype had 3 different color alarms. So it had blue for too cold, green for good, and red for too hot. And for us, that makes total sense. We presented everywhere in the US and they were like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And then we go to Malawi to confirm the alarms. And like people in Malawi would tell us, no, blue is like nice, like comfortable. Blue is like okay. And I think everyone agreed that the green was good, but kind of doing more exploration into that, we thought, wait, do we actually need a visual alarm when the baby is good? Because normally when we see something beeping or with a light on, it's something to take notice. We ended up, descaling that green alarm into no visual alarm. And then I think everyone agreed that like red was caution or red was alert. So we actually ended up pivoting into just one red alarm for either hot or cold. Because at the end, it's like, okay, are you going to take a different action if it's blue or if it's red? And our thought process was like, I think regardless, you need to go and check the baby. And then once you have that interaction, then you can decide what to do.
That's fascinating. It's always interesting to me, the kinds of questions that seem unrelated that get pulled into the design process. Like there's a question here about what are the cultural connotations of different colors in different places.
Yes. And
it's so random.
Yes. And I think even thinking beyond Malawi, right? Like probably that was going to change like everywhere. So trying to make it like as simple as possible. And honestly, with ourselves thinking ourselves so global, like some things might not work in different word flows, right? So just a word for designers out there that we're always like, we're gonna do everything, and sometimes one size does not fit all, and trying to honor our context that we can design for, and then also be willing to adapt emerging or coming into another market that might have other repercussions in terms of like having to make another version of the device or another iteration.
Yeah. It makes me realize that humility is so important when we are designing for people that we don't personally know. I'm curious. I'm sure you saw several prototypes of this device. What were some of the parameters the engineering team or the lab team was trying to get right?
So we wanted to have a portable device with like a vital sign patient monitor. So if you think of that, it's like this big chunky thing that they call it portable, but it's heavy. But we wanted to just make it portable and easy to mount. We first thought that it could be placed in a table or hung in like an IV pole or like strapped into like the crib. And we wanted it to be like that adaptable. And then the second thing that we wanted to do was have no consumables. We wanted all of the components to be reusable.
She said having a disposable part the user would need to procure by themselves would hinder the use of the device. This reminded me of my conversation with Tanner from episode 1, where we talked about device graveyards. Sometimes these devices go out there and they break in 6 months or a couple of years, and then they just don't have the resources to repair it.
Yeah, and especially I think we specifically wanted a reusable skin probe or temperature sensor. A lot of people, like nowadays, especially in the US, they just use disposable sensors for everything. So if someone wants to send like a multi-parameter patient monitor that in the US has only been used with disposable sensors, maybe they're not going to think of also sending a good supply of those disposable sensors. And then once that supply breaks, then or if it depletes, you're not able to use the device.
Yeah. And it sounds like having something reusable there might be better for cost, sustainability, access, so many different things at the same time. Was that also how you were thinking about it?
Yes, that was definitely what we were thinking. And especially, I think for a lot of these, like talking about patient monitors, even in their user manuals, they just say, even if you're using, for example, a reusable temperature sensor, they say, use the appropriate adhesive cover. So they don't even tell you like what size for what kind, like they don't tell you what to procure. Like even for me trying to do that desk research, I was like, I want someone to tell me what do I need to buy. I guess they are counting on just having this like maybe massive procurement team that just is gonna know what to buy. but maybe in like the cases that we're thinking about, they don't have that infrastructure, and they might just say, I'm just going to use like adhesive that I use to set IV lines and just put that on the temperature probe.
Walk us through what you eventually decided in terms of the adhesive and just the three components of the design.
Yes, so like our main thing is our monitor. It's like a little box that has just like a top side for the visual alarm, and then just like a big-ish screen in the front. And we have several indicators for temperature, like if the probe is plugged in or not. And then what I mentioned about the attachment mechanisms, we kind of designed this, I think we call it, like we took inspiration on like a bicycle strap.
She holds it up for me. It looks like a small ladder made out of soft white plastic.
And with this little tail, you're able to put it flat in your table, set it in like an IV pole, or hang it even with a nail. And then with this little part, you can strap it to something to stay in place. So those were our different mechanisms that we thought. And then this is the reusable temperature probe that is connected to our reusable abdominal belt.
Instead of a disposable adhesive or tape, they built a belt to hold the sensor firm and stable on the baby's skin. It seems obvious once you see it.
So the belt is replacing the sticker that we need to buy like externally. So this wraps around the baby's belly, and in our instruction manual, we actually do have a specific place where you need to put it. A lot of monitors do not tell you where to put it. They just say put it in the abdomen.
I especially admired their emphasis on ease of use, from a reusable belt with instructions on how to put it on, to the 10 different ways Sonia described of attaching this monitor onto a hospital bed.
There's a lot of different technologies that are already out there that they could have decided to just buy like an off-the-shelf circuit board, but they did do the design of their circuitry, trying to protect from surges of power that are just like high surges that normally are not thought of. A lot of these boards or other people that are not designing for low resource settings, they just assume stable power.
I see a lot of the values you were talking about in the device because it looks easy to use and simple. The numbers are visible really prominently, but it also looks high quality. It looks like something I would go buy in a CVS or...
Yes, definitely. I think the final devices, like they are good quality devices that have passed like all the standards that they could even be used in high resource settings.
I never imagined nurses needing anything fancier than a thermometer before hearing Sonia's description of the chaos in these wards. Next, we explore some challenges in bringing Celsi to the market. Do you know what the price of this device versus a traditional patient monitor is?
Yes, I'm not sure what's going to be the commercial cost. I think it's going to be maybe $250, and it includes 2 probes and 2 belts to have more of that, have extras. I think there is not really anything like this in the market. So I feel like we can't really compare ourselves with a vital signs patient monitor that it's in the thousands of dollars range, because this is just measuring one vital sign. So that also, the landscape is a little bit tricky because this is meant to provide continuous temperature monitoring, and I feel like we're almost competing against an auxiliary temperature device.
An auxiliary temperature device refers to a regular thermometer
that will cost, I don't know, $5, but also kind of competing against the concept of spot check versus continuous, and really trying to do some educating among the different stakeholders, because now we're going to distributors, right? So it's like the distributors have to talk to the receiving end companies that then can sell to hospitals. So there needs to be like more education across all that chain that continuous temperature is important.
Yeah, that sounds difficult, trying to change people's assumptions about how temperature should be monitored, or change their habits around it.
Yes. And I think if you ask if you ask in the clinic, they will say, yes, this is important and this is valuable. But then if that is $250 versus like a $10 auxiliary temperature, I think the ones making the decisions on what to buy, they're going to be like, no, let's just get the cheapest. So then that's when the disconnect, I believe, starts to happen.
Interesting. Do some of these disconnects come to light as you're going through the clinical validation? I know there was a feasibility study done on this. Walk us through the different types of studies and what are you trying to measure or evaluate in each of them?
Yeah. So the first evaluation we did was in 2017, and we evaluated like our first prototype. Like it had an Arduino inside the little box, and we had a 7-segment displayed, and it had the three lights that we shared. And because we were going to test it connected to a computer, it didn't even have a battery. So the battery exploration was done after the fact of like how many hours are we trying to give power with a single charge. So we just wanted to measure like our proof of concept way of measuring the temperature, if that was comparable to a vital signs patient monitor that is like regulatory approved, and also that we were able to have good contact with our attachment mechanism of the abdominal belt. To our knowledge, like that has not been tried before. So that was where we tried then, and we did have good accuracy. And then in the second evaluation that we did in 2020, we had some preliminary belts made out of silicones. We tested the 3 different iterations for increasing periods of time. We started at 3 hours, and then we did 6 hours, and then we did 12 hours, and I believe we did up to 24 hours, just to make sure that just having the abdominal belt in there for that long of a time didn't pose any risk to the baby, and that it was also able to stay secure, because we didn't want this to be something that always continuous temperature, but you need to check it every hour to see if it's still reading correctly. We wanted to know that it was going to stay put for a while, also while not providing any irritation to the baby. So I think in Houston, we ended up discarding one of the belt prototypes, and then we just took less to Malawi. So we tested those in Malawi as well, and we continued to have good accuracy. And then I guess there was like an interesting time between 2020 and 2022 where we just kind of were doing some like exploration and documentation, and everything was very vague and up in the air because of the pandemic, and also as I said before, like trying to procure all of these materials, and some of them were delayed. So it just delayed our timeline a little bit. But finally, in 2022, we were able to do a large clinical validation study in Kenya. So try to go to a hospital we had never been to, validate our design there on a bigger sample size, and like see what happened there. It was a control study. Like study personnel was the one that was attaching the device, so they were trained, but it was also trying to see what was the perception in the ward. Informally tried to determine that what was the perception of the device in the ward, and we wanted to test a little bit more just across weight ranges. Can we do like a 1 kilogram and a 4 kilogram baby and just have the same accuracy? I think before we were doing just a convenient sample size, and we again obtained good results from that.
Hearing about Celsi's journey, it made sense why so many ideas never make it out of academia. There's so much they had to do. from testing on babies at different weights for different times in different countries, to educating distributors on why this device was needed at all. It's amazing to see how many different kinds of experiments go into this. I know Celsi finally got its FDA clearance in 2023. So congratulations for that. How did that moment feel?
Yeah, thank you. And honestly, it was interesting. It was a little bit anticlimactic because the way I personally learned it was just like very nonchalant. By that time, I guess I had like moved towards like the clinical study, so I wasn't on the design process, and it was mostly like from our manufacturing company. And almost to me, I really don't do a good job to like pause and be grateful like when these accomplishments happen, because I think at that time I was pivoting to another study. So I was like, okay, that happened. Now I have so much work to do and this other thing. But I think the more I let it sit on me, I was like, whoa, there was a lot of time put into it, and I'm glad that it's reached that point. I think regulatory approval is really important, and trying to get there is really important. So trying to sit on that. But then the other thing is like, okay, now you have to sell it, right? It'll be interesting to see how that ends up happening and how that goes.
That's fascinating. Usually, how does Rice360 put its devices out there? Do you go through agencies, commercial markets?
So I know with CPAP, it did go into kind of like commercial sales, and there's just different avenues for that. There is some like WHO UNICEF listing of devices. So it's like a device catalog that hopefully if you can get there, I think that can increase your visibility. And then there's a contact where you can be like, oh, I'm from this country, is it available in this country, and then try to get it there. But through our current Nest 360 Alliance, I think there is there's like its own team trying to analyze like what is the market landscape and how can we enter into this country. So they have a distributing entity that's kind of like that. Its sole purpose is trying to look at the market in Africa. They're based in Kenya. Hatch Technologies is their name. So they're kind of like the middleman between like the manufacturers and the actual distributors. And they're currently trying to also see how they can go into other countries. That is also a big issue. Kind of like you have to go to like their version of the FDA and have it approved. So that's also like timeline that just has to happen like country per country. I came in determined to not let what I was working on just stay in a paper of like, we developed this and now it's never going to be sold. It's bittersweet to get to see like how hard it actually is, but also for students to get to do all these projects, hopefully they will also inspire them to not just leave their senior design into, we did 3 tests and here's our capstone thesis, and then we're gonna peace out.
That's exactly how my capstone was. I tried to make a low-cost pneumonia detection stethoscope, and it was really hard. So we worked on it for 6 months, and then nothing happened. I shouldn't be saying it so happily. There should be a better structure for taking these projects forward.
Yes, and a lot of times is just bandwidth and what people want to do. But my hope is that now that you have that real experience, hopefully you can't unsee the problem anymore.
In the last part of this episode, we talk about Rice360's Invention Education model and how it impacts students. As I understand, because of Rice360 demonstrating the success of this model, it's been taken up in a bunch of other universities. Is there anything else you'd like to share about how that works, how students benefit from it?
So a project goes into the students. They're giving the problem. Most of the times they're contacted with a clinical partner, either in the US or abroad, that can just continue to speak more into the need. And there may be several. There might be an introductory design class, and then there might be like a secondary class or a capstone project, depending on the level of complexity or depending on the stage where it is, right? So maybe it goes into a freshman undergraduate project for like 2 or 3 years, and then it keeps escalating. The most promising ideas are developed and refined by our post-baccalaureate engineering fellowship to create a working prototype, refine the design, like clinical studies, like testing it in humans, and kind of like steer the manufacturing process as it's hoping to take off into commercialization.
Yeah, I find this idea fascinating that you can educate students and give them experience while working on something tangible, because so much labor goes into, I don't know if it's right to call it labor, but so much effort goes into our college classes. And if that's harnessable for some kind of real world impact, then it's just a win-win for everyone.
Our co-directors are engineers at heart as well. So as maybe they were getting more well-known, they started to develop collaborations with different engineering schools that they were saying, oh, this is really interesting. Why don't we make our own devices for our own people? Of course. So something that I remember hearing is that many years ago, because thankfully like that partnership has been going on for a while, like Malawi engineering classes, it was just people sitting and copying the circuitry and like trying to do that, but they would never get like real hands experience. Trying to have that hands-on experience with things and try to play with like maker labs, like rapid prototyping, bringing all that we were, I guess we have been already doing in the States, has helped a lot. Try to really bring up the possibilities of like, what could I make? What could happen? So these like maker labs, they're being called now design studios. So trying to set up design studios in different universities in different countries. That has also not been a small task, because sometimes there are like no laser cutters like available to purchase in the country. So it's like this whole procurement issue in itself. Some of these design studios have really benefited from having access to these tools. And I know in Tanzania, they're trying to like leverage these tools to help just even make like spin like just different small businesses from that both helps the design studio and the end market. And also for them to have the thoughts of all of these like resources or lack of resources and how you can innovate around that. Like, oh, maybe acrylic is not available here, but this other similar thing is available, like pressing into the creativity and the innovation aspect of things.
That sounds really amazing. It sounds like you're not just taking health technologies global, but the education and design philosophy that comes with it. Kind of part of the broader push to move towards more in-country innovation and try and build intellectual capital, educational resources in the global south.
Yeah, I think the hope of that has always been trying to provide things, try to introduce things, and then just see what can happen, right? So eventually take a step back and let them lead and innovate. And most of them are already innovating on their own. I guess all of that we're not claiming any control over. It's from the university, within the university for themselves. So it's mostly just trying to provide the access, and letting them take it from there.
I was amazed to hear about the ecosystems that have grown around these maker spaces. They not only provide new tools and hands-on education, but also spawn out local solutions and businesses. Sonia cares deeply about her work. we end with some reflections on how it feels for her to be in this space. I am curious, like you were talking a bit about how there's so much going on that it's hard to really pause and celebrate a win. And I've also been thinking a lot about what impact really means in this kind of a setting. So is there a point with this device or any other device that you get to sit down and say, hey, we made the impact we wanted to, we've won on this problem? What does that look like for you personally and for the organization?
Yeah, honestly, I've been here for 7 years, except for maybe the pandemic bit. It has felt like just really, really short or not enough time to do what I would like to do. Yeah, sometimes these problems seem so big, and they are so big. So not trying to minimize like why am I not global yet, you know? And I think that also speaks to what you were saying, having humility. And for me, it's like whenever I really try to sit back and think of, well, if one baby hopefully is safe because of this, or even through the clinical studies, maybe if that happens, like am I happy with that, and like can I celebrate that, and like thank you for that happening. But at the same time, there's always the next project, the next thing. So also trying to determine your bandwidth and capacity. And sometimes you will determine that by being overstretched, and then being like, okay, I need to rein it in, and also like having a life, you know?
Yeah, no, that work-life balance is super important, and one can only keep doing what they do if they're otherwise fulfilled, happy, in a space where they're able to work and produce. So totally resonate with that aspect. I can tell from the way you're talking about this that you just care a lot. I don't know, I wish more engineers were able to tap into that side of them. I think engineering is taught in a very cold way in a lot of places. Thankfully, my degree, at least we had some components of design and interviews in our capstone. But I know a lot of colleges don't teach it that way. Is there something, if there's young engineers out there listening to this who are not sure which direction to go in, what are some things they can reflect on, or some experiences they can get to understand what this path could be? It seems like a very unknown, uncharted path. There's not a lot of companies which advertise themselves as global health technology companies.
Yeah, this is a good question. Yeah, I would say, do you have a passion for global health? And I mean, I think for you and me, Smitty, we talked about this before, but I think for me, like global health is health. From my background, from the things that I've seen firsthand. So it is a cost of like finances and time and resources, but like you gain other things, right? I had an opportunity to go on like a summer institute with Engineering World Health, and they're based in the States. They're out of Duke University, and you could apply to have a local chapter at your university. They do exactly that, like pitch people with like real global health challenges, and then you can work on a project. And they have also, I believe, a design competition that they run, like summer institutes where you get to travel to a country for 2 months and like learn the culture, learn about how to repair medical equipment, and then get to serve in a hospital doing that. And hopefully that can also give you like real life experience. And yes, as you were saying, there are not a lot of companies, but I think trying to do your research on that is also valuable. We have the fellowship at Rice360. There's another company called Global Health Labs, and there are some of the big companies that have global health components. There might be opportunities there.
Yeah. At the very least, it's exciting and hopeful to see your journey, and you've carved apart from being a fellow to now working at Rice360. And yeah, I guess some paths you just have to carve for yourself. There's not going to be a yellow brick road. It's been really exciting talking to you. I'd like to end on a lighter and slightly more personal note. What's something simple you do every day for your own health or the health of your neighborhood, family, community, however you'd like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you. I think faith is a really important part of my life. So just trying to have times in the morning where I connect with God. I believe that everything good comes from Him. So if I'm able to do anything at all, it'll be because of Him. And then something that that I've been trying to do like this past years has just been, up to a certain point, I do give like in my work, but also trying to give locally, because I think a lot of times we are just trying to seek things for ourselves to make us feel better. But I think trying to look out really has changed my perspective of like who I am in the world, and currently kind of like trying to bloom where you're planted, especially as someone that lives in the States and like works in global health. The people I'm trying to help are so far away that it's hard to almost like get any satisfaction from it. So trying to have those personal interactions here. And one really specific way that I've done lately is like trying to know my neighbors, just trying to know where they are. And a lot of times I really don't see them. Like we're ships in the night, like I don't see their cars. But if I do get to see them, just trying to be intentional and can I be like 5 minutes late to my next thing, but just try to say hi and ask how they're doing and if there's anything I can do to help them.
I love the phrase, bloom where you're planted. There's a lot in that. Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcast. This is a part of our launch series. Going forward, we'll bring to you every fortnight a new conversation on how technology can transform human and planetary health. Till then, breathe deep, stretch something that feels stiff, and look around. Notice something curious, delightful, or in need of care. We are gifted with so many chances to love and wonder every day.